Morning, Grace. I hope you're doing well. For those of you who have been following our journey with CBR, Community Bible Reading, we have been reading the Bible together for probably about 2 years now. And today, well, rather last week, we embarked on a new book. So we just finished coming through First and Second Chronicles, which I loved. I don't know about you. There are admittedly quite a few lists of names in those books, but they just beautifully and brilliantly show the need of the world for Jesus. Flawed, failed kings, failed people who with half their heart want to please God and half their heart don't, just setting the scene beautifully for the Messiah, the Christ, God's anointed king who would come. So I've loved that. But as we come to the end of Second Chronicles, we enter into a new world. We're coming to Ezra and Nehemiah. We're already a couple of chapters into Ezra. And I thought it would be helpful to share a few thoughts on those books and a couple of tips really for reading them. The first big thing is they're one book. The Jewish Bible was written. Ezra and Nehemiah are one. They're separate in our modern English Bible, but actually they're meant to be together. They're telling the same story, and really the themes that are going through them are repeated all the way through. So read them together, don't read them as separates. As you read them, you are looking for a few big themes. They're history books, which means they tell a story, and the story they're telling picks up where we've been reading in Second Chronicles. So it's the story of God's people having been ripped out of their promised land. So God, through the Bible, has promised his people a land, a place to dwell in safety and security, a place where his blessings will flow like wine and milk and honey upon them. But the covenant came with a condition, that they were obedient to him, that they followed his commands, that they walked with him, most of all that they trusted in him, and they haven't done that. After we've seen king after king after king, the people of God have turned to foreign idols, to foreign gods. They've turned to foreign nations for protection. It's all gone down that way. And so as God's people have abandoned God, so God has withdrawn his protection, and they've known the judgment of God through foreign kings. And so in that context, Ezra opens up on a really surprising note, and it picks up on a prophecy made through Jeremiah. And it's this, that God will again use a foreign king, this time not for judgment, but for salvation. And it's remarkable. In a sense, it smarts God's people. They read it and they think, why is God using a foreigner to help us? And yet, it's what he does. And there's a hint in there, I think, as to the future of God's people and how the horizons of his purposes are far broader than a small plot of land in Canaan. So as you read through, you open up Ezra, you walk into Nehemiah. There are really kind of three big components that are going on. And again, it's a story of God's people coming home. God's people seeking to rebuild. And it really, the three sections are this. The first part of Ezra is all about the construction of the temple. Now, the temple has been demolished. It's been ransacked, all of the treasures taken out, it's been burned. The first part of Ezra picks up on that story. The people of God come home. King Cyrus of Persia sends money to help with the rebuilding project. God has told him to, and he does. And so the people of God start to build. And then Ezra moves into the story of Ezra himself leading the renewal of God's people, or seeking to. It's about moral reformation, purity, God's people living according to the laws of God. And then you come into Nehemiah, which is kind of the third part of the book. And Nehemiah tells us the story of the rebuilding of Jerusalem, specifically the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. And it's set amidst the backdrop of the incredible promises that God has made through the prophets, throughout the Old Testament, to the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the way back to Eden. And you're left wondering as you read through Ezra and Nehemiah, will God keep his promises? Will he do what he has said? Will he make for himself a people who will dwell in safety and security? That's the question. One of the strange things about reading these books is, at least for me, as you read through, there's a real air of disappointment. Will God keep his promises? Well, you read through and you think, hey, hang on a minute. He doesn't seem to be doing all that he said he would do. In fact, he doesn't even seem to be doing as much as he's done through, for example, David or Solomon. He seems to be doing less. The fact is, as you read through, and by the way, as you read through it, you'll see the temple is rebuilt. The people are in a sense morally reformed. There's a lot of intermarrying being going on, and Ezra and Nehemiah try and put a stop to that. The walls are rebuilt. It happens, but the product is disappointing. It isn't like it used to be. In fact, we read yesterday, the old men who remember something of the temple as it was are weeping. So disappointing is the new temple. It doesn't have the grandeur, the majesty, the riches, the splendour, the gold. Most significantly, God's presence doesn't seem to be known there. Like in the account of the dedication under Solomon, the glory falls, the earth shakes, and it's astounding, and people are flooding the fields all around Jerusalem, singing out in praise. Well, now they build the foundations, and the men are weeping. So disappointing is the story. And as you read through, you're just left with almost a sense of longing for what was. And that's what's going on amongst them. Oh God, to go back. Well, that would be a mistake, because what Ezra and Nehemiah does more than any other book, I think, is to point us forwards. In a sense, these books are the bridge between the world of 1st and 2nd Chronicles and the world of Jesus. They tell the story of the culture and the world into which Jesus was born. You see, as you read through Ezra and Nehemiah, you see a culture, a mindset that is very parochial. It's small-minded. It's very monocultural. So there's, quite rightly, there's a pushing against the intermingling of different faiths and ideas and gods. The people want to be pure and after God's own heart. And yet there's a shutting out of anyone who isn't seen as being part of the in crowd. And so there's in Jerusalem, when Nehemiah builds the temple, he goes to lengths to keep out the people who he doesn't deem worthy. It smells a little bit of Pharisaism. There's also this ongoing theme of massive opposition to the work of the temple and the work of the building of the walls. And you're almost reminded, you almost are going back to the entrance of God's people into the land, only without the mighty victories. And you're left wondering, really, is this all there is? It just seems so small. And remember, I said a moment ago, this is all set amidst the backdrop of the glorious promises of God. Now, God has made some astounding promises to his people. That the Jews would be a light to the nations, that the Gentiles would worship the one true God, and yet now it seems that even the people of God aren't worshipping the one true God. What's going on? Well, I want to encourage you, as you read through the book, allow them to stir within you a longing for the Messiah, for the coming King, for the one who would make all right, for the one who would gather the nations. I think more than anything else, Ezra and Nehemiah does that. They point us towards Jesus. And so as you read, you're reading history, but don't read it just like a history book. Read it like a bridge, a pathway, if you like, between the failings and the brokenness of the people of God in the Old Testament, between a world of kings who led their people poorly, a road that leads forwards to Jesus. Nehemiah, I love there's a story, and I've mentioned this before, but there's a story where Nehemiah just gets so frustrated with the people of God that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not being obedient. They're not faithful. Their hearts are just full of wrong things. Nehemiah gets so irate, he literally starts picking fights with people and pulling people's hair out. Not a great pastoral strategy. If I ever start doing that, feel free to sack me or something. That's what's happening. Fast forward several hundred years, and you've got the Pharisees behaving very similarly, saying to the tax collectors, the sinners, the prostitutes, you don't belong, you're not worthy. And then comes Jesus. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. Ezra and Nehemiah are telling a history, but they're telling a history that leads us to Jesus. So look for him in these pages, and allow that longing, that desire, that need of him and for him to grow. These books show us that the gospel is for the world. They lift up our horizons. They inspire us as a church not to be parochial, not to be sleepy, not to look after our own needs alone. They inspire us as a church to see that the church is for the world. Jesus is for the world. We cannot be parochial. We cannot be small-minded. Jesus came for all people. We are here to serve all people. So be inspired. The gospel is bigger than you ever dreamt it could be. The promises of God will be fulfilled and have been fulfilled through Jesus. And one day all nations, every tongue, every knee, people from every tribe and nation will worship at the throne of the one true King. God bless you as you read it. Feel free to ask any questions or any shout outs you want to do. Anything you think, I don't get this, or why is that there, or I got a great thought on this, just throw them out. We'd love to hear from you. God bless you. Enjoy